everyone, and in this part we are talking about paper carving. And actually, paper carving is just a part of what we call a paper cutting. And paper cutting is the general name of different skills that belongs to this art that handle paper. So the term includes paper carving and paper tearing and paper stickering. And the latter also belongs to tearing. And now we mostly do paper carving and paper cutting. And the form of paper cutting is different between North China and South China. And in North China, people usually cut with scissors. And while in South China, people will do this job by using knives. So which means that paper carving is a specialty popular just in South China. And paper carving is different from paper cutting in characteristics that by cutting paper, we can only cut one piece of paper. And it is very hard to show all the details. And which means for some very delicate part, cutting doesn't work. But by cutting skills, we can manage to make it possible. For instance, it is difficult to use scissors to cut patterns as thin as hair or as small as rice grains. But carving knife can do that job, which is fine and delicate. Besides, in terms of quantity, as we know, we can only get 1 or 2 pieces by paper cuttings at a time. But by paper carving, can we make for a time 20 or even 30 pieces of paper works. If the paper is very excellent in quality, such as the shanzhi or shan paper, the number we can make each time will be even higher. So, among all the forms of paper cutting techniques, paper carving is the more delicate one that we could choose to make a pattern that requires more hollowed spaces. Now, let's see the techniques first and learn about techniques of paper carving. And we usually start with a sketch painting first and bind all the sketches before carving. And then we'll do the paper carving, which is hard to finish with only one knife. And a backing board is necessary for the carving job. The backing board for paper carving is a very special thing that it is quite different from glass board or the similar things like that as we usually understand. We usually use an oil board or wax board, and only with all these materials can we successfully do paper carving. Next, we will see more tools that are needed for paper carving than paper cutting in comparison, and why we need a carving knife, a scraper, and a paper weight stick. The stick here, I have to say with a few more words, that not every paper cutting artist is used to using the paper weight stick. Some like it, but some hate it. But you can use it to hold down your paper, and this is quite a perk in processing. And another important tool is the paper carving knife. And we'd better choose the knife that must be long, and its blade of the knife should be long enough and should not be too wide. And talking about the blade, we have a common sense that it should also be inclined, a sloping side. There is no need or rule to use flat carving, but it's hard to give the exact figure of the degree of inclination, since one might choose a long, thin knife which is that long like this and much thinner. And we can also make a knife by ourselves. If we make knives by ourselves, usually it will be made of white steel. And white steel is the best material, of course. But here is one drawback, as it is brittle and very easy to break. And next I will show you how such a carving knife works in making patterns. First of all, set in the wax board and get it down in place. Then put the paper binding of the paintings on the board and have the carving knife and the paper with stick on hand. Frankly, now the paper we are using and the paper that we bind is shanzhi or shan paper for traditional Chinese paintings or calligraphy. And we see there are 20 pieces of shan paper in a stack. And when carving, just remember to be careful that the knife should be perpendicular to paper. So you should never do the carving like this. And the knife cannot set tilt. Just remember it should be perpendicular. And then put the stick close to the blade and slowly move on to carve on the slants. Just remember to do this very, very slowly. But how can I do kind of slant carving on the whole paper? Here are the tips that I want you to remember. The first one is we need to carve from small to large, from thin to thick, and from inside to outside, which means that we have a proper order in carving and make the smaller one first. For example, the eyes are small that we can do them first. So I will show you here. Let's follow my move. And another one is how to carve the circle. So let me show you the right way. And remember, the stick should remain close to the knife all the time. And what I request is to be calm and patient. Just take it easy. And by the way, you can also carve it from the back for some extra carving strokes. But of course, you should be careful on the back. Then we move on to carve the peripheral parts. Then the thorn patterns that we need to be careful. To carve the thorns, you should put the knife vertical to the paper and carve crisscross and left, right, and right. If you are used to it, you will speed up and finish them soon. But if you are not, just carve it bit by bit and you will do it. You can incline the blade when moving the knife toward the paper, but once your knife is in the paper, you must keep the blade vertical, which is very, very important, or you can make it a success. Just remember to make sure that depth of the knife carving inside the paper is sufficient. and that the knife should be vertical, like this. Just go vertical onto the paper. And don't skew it in the end. Just keep it vertical and remain vertical till the end of the carving job. Well, that's done, and then let's pick it out with a knife. Okay, now it turns out to be a thorn. And it is very clear, we see on the back of the paper that the thorns are carved in place, just one by one. And then we're going to see another part. Just be careful when dealing with this part, where the edge easily curves up. And we might press it with a paper weight stick, and then gently and slowly carve it piece by piece. And this is a very slow job that requires great patience. And now the inside part of this paper is down. See? And we are going to carve the outside part. And as I said, we should carve from inside to outside. And this is the last part. Here are some do's and don'ts that you need to remember. For carving the outside part, let's say, you need to check whether the carved position inside moves and don't let it deviate from its original position, or that we should never skew from direction. And slowly, we carve from one direction to a set destination, cut and cut. And there's one more thing to remember in the process, and take this nail as example. If I want to keep it, it means that it's the last thing left in the paper. And after finishing all the other parts, and we will continue to carve it, and then carve from small to large, and finish the small part first. And here's one other thing about knife, and what we should do is to sort up and down with knife, rather than sliding the knife left and right. So remember, it's up and down, not left and right. And when carving, to where the two ends cross, and we need to turn the knife like this, just to keep the knife vertical. And the blade should also be vertical. Just take it like this way and keep the direction. And at this time we need to cut it off. And it is the same here, that the blade should be cut vertically into this edge. And just press it with the paper weight stick. And if you don't do that, it will curl up to one side. Okay, so now we press it, and with the knife and the blade that we must keep vertical, and then pick it out with the knife. If it doesn't work, remember not to tear it off. You can just check it out and pick it out again with the blade. And it is similar to using paper cutting. And we can tear it off by hand, but just let it fall in the process of carving. And it is all finished now. We should take it out, the outside part, but we should be very careful in doing this job and use the paper weight stick. And to press the position here, and just right here, and move over bit by bit. And remember, don't rush it. Tear with a force, because sometimes the part may not be finished, so the junction looks very easy to break when you're pulling. All you need to do is just to move bit by bit. You have to be very careful and patient. Then until the paper carving is done, and here is the done work. And since the last piece is a protective layer, and now the layer is useless, so you can just throw it away. And after all these steps, let's grab a corner of the paper, the carving, and shake it. Just shake it. And we do this to shake off some possible scraps of the paper. So it is a skill. If there's any scrap still left on paper, we have to poke it out, since it sticks in the paper carving. Okay, so now let's start, and then we can get a whole piece of paper and just below it and look at what we have done. Through all these steps that I mentioned, it will get a well-finished work. And finally, we will get a complete paper work. That's all. Thanks for watching.